The whisper reached me before the bell did. I felt it before I heard the words, a shift in the air of the hallway, the kind of quiet that comes right before something breaks. Students who usually called out greetings now looked away when I passed. A pair of Kael'thi girls near the lockers stopped talking the moment they saw me, their pale violet eyes flicking toward the west corridor and then back to their books. My name is Mira Voss, and I have spent 3 years at Aldenwick Academy trying to be forgettable. That is not easy when you are the only human on a campus built for beings who consider a strong breeze a serious weather event. I walked to my locker with my head down, the way I always did, my footsteps quiet on the polished floor. The corridor lights above me pulsed a soft blue, the same rhythm they always kept, calm and steady, matching the low hum of the climate systems that ran through the walls of every building on this campus. Aldenwick was proud of its technology. The whole school was wired with sensors that tracked temperature, air quality, sound levels, and student stress readings, all so the fragile students who studied here would never be caught off guard by anything dangerous. I used to find that comforting. Today it felt like the whole building was listening. Lily caught up to me at the end of the hall, her short brown hair bouncing as she jogged to match my pace. She was one of the only people who treated me like a normal classmate instead of a strange animal wearing a school uniform. "You heard, didn't you?" she said quietly. I did not answer right away. I did not need to ask what she meant. "Threll has been telling everyone since lunch," she continued. "He said you humiliated him in front of the whole class, and he is not going to let that go unanswered. His words, not mine." I remembered the debate class from that morning. Threll was the top student in etiquette and rhetoric, a Kael'thi from one of the oldest and wealthiest families on his home world. He had built his entire reputation on being clever, graceful, and untouchable. That morning, during an open discussion about resilience and survival, he had made a comment about how humans were emotional creatures who reacted with feelings instead of logic. I had simply pointed out that species who evolved on a gentle world with no natural predators had never needed to develop the kind of discipline that harsh environments force onto a person. I had not raised my voice. I had not even changed my tone, but the class had laughed, and Threll had gone pale, and pale on a Kael'thi face is very easy to see. I did not say it to embarrass him. I told Lily. "That does not matter to him," she said. "He does not care what you meant. He cares what everyone saw." We reached my locker, and I opened it slowly, taking out the books I needed for my afternoon classes. My hands were steady. They were always steady. That was something my mother had taught me a long time ago, back on Earth, in the mountain settlement where I grew up. Steady hands do not give anyone a reason to worry. Lily leaned against the locker next to mine, watching me with the kind of concern she usually reserved for wounded animals. "People are saying he is planning something for after class," she said. "Something in the west corridor. I heard Vantik and Korath are going to be there too. And Sella." I closed my locker. "4 of them," I said, mostly to myself. "Mira, this is not a joke," Lily said, her voice dropping even lower. "These are not gentle people. I know they look delicate, but they train in combat forms too. And even if they did not, 4 against 1 is 4 against 1. I appreciated her worry. I truly did. But she did not understand what I understood, what none of my classmates here understood, because none of them had ever needed to. I come from a place called Earth, and more specifically from a region called the Kestrel Range, a mountain territory known across every settled world in this sector for one simple fact. It tries to kill everyone who lives there, every single day, without exception. The gravity in the Kestrel Range is heavier than most inhabited worlds. The storms arrive without warning, carrying winds strong enough to lift a grown adult off their feet. The temperature can swing from freezing to blistering heat within a single day. The wildlife is not cute. The plants are not harmless. Even the rivers move with a violence that most people on gentler worlds would call terrifying. Children who grow up there do not learn to walk before they learn to survive. We learn both at the same time. By the time I was 6 years old, I had already been caught outside during a level 3 storm and had to shelter under a rock overhang for 11 hours, listening to wind that sounded like the sky itself was screaming. By the time I was 10, I had learned to identify 17 different plants that could kill a person within minutes if handled wrong. By the time I was 14, I had already helped carry an injured neighbor 3 miles down a mountain path in the dark, because the medical transport could not fly through the weather. None of this made me special. Every single person from the Kestrel Range has stories like these. It is simply what it means to grow up there. What made me different, what made all of us from that region different when we left our world, was something we rarely talked about, because it never felt like something worth mentioning. Our bodies had adapted, bones grown denser to handle the crushing gravity, muscles built thicker and tougher to handle constant physical strain, reflexes sharpened by a childhood spent reacting to danger before it fully arrived. None of it made us fast the way some species were fast, or graceful the way some species were graceful. It simply made us extremely hard to hurt, and even harder to stop once we had decided not to be stopped. I had never needed to test the second part while at Aldenwick. I had never wanted to. The bell rang, sharp and clear, echoing down the corridor. Lily jumped slightly at the sound, still watching me with worried eyes. "Please just avoid the west corridor after class," she said. "Take the long way, please." I gave her a small smile, the kind I had practiced for years to make myself seem smaller, softer, less like something that did not belong among children who could be seriously hurt by a hard handshake. "I will be careful," I told her. It was not exactly a promise, and some part of me thinks she noticed that, because her frown deepened before she turned and hurried off to her next class. I made my way through the rest of the day the way I always did, quiet, attentive, careful never to grip a pen too hard or push a door open with more force than necessary. In my science class, I watched Professor Adrian demonstrate an experiment involving pressure differentials, and I found myself thinking about how strange it was that an entire species could build advanced technology to measure forces they had never personally experienced in their own bodies. In my history class, I sat 2 rows behind Threll, who did not turn around once, though I noticed the tension in his shoulders every time someone whispered near him. He knew people were talking. He knew everyone had seen his face go pale that morning, and in a culture built almost entirely around reputation and grace, that kind of public embarrassment was not something easily forgiven. I understood, in an abstract way, why he was angry. I had grown up watching my own community deal with pride and shame in different ways, though usually with far less at stake than a young noble's social standing among his peers. Still, understanding why someone is angry is not the same as agreeing that anger should be allowed to turn into something dangerous. By the final period of the day, the whispers had grown louder, not quieter. I caught fragments of conversation as I walked between classes. She humiliated him in front of the entire room. 4 of them are waiting for her after the bell. I heard Sella brought something to help even the odds. I do not know if she even understands what is coming. That last comment stuck with me the most, because it was true in a way none of them realized. I did understand what was coming, far better than any of them did. I understood it the way someone who has survived 100 storms understands the shape of clouds before rain arrives. What none of them understood was what would actually happen once it started, because none of them had ever seen someone from my world truly tested. I sat through my final class only half listening to the lecture, my thoughts drifting instead to the west corridor and the 4 students who would likely be waiting there. I ran through every possible version of the encounter in my mind, the way my mother had taught me to do before any dangerous hike or storm crossing. Prepare for it before it happens. Know your options before you need them. Never let fear make the decision for you. The final bell rang, and the room emptied around me in a rush of chatter and movement. I gathered my things slowly, deliberately, giving myself a few extra moments to settle my breathing and steady my thoughts. As I stepped out into the hallway, I noticed something odd. The corridor lights, usually a warm and steady white, had shifted to a dimmer, cooler tone, the kind the building used during storm alerts, back when Aldenwick had experienced a rare atmospheric disturbance the previous year. The ambient hum from the environmental systems, usually a comforting background presence, had softened, almost as if the building itself had lowered its voice. I paused for a moment, glancing up at the small sensor node embedded near the ceiling, its tiny light blinking at a slower interval than usual. It almost looked like the walls were bracing themselves. I adjusted the strap of my bag over my shoulder, took a slow breath, and began walking toward the west corridor, toward whatever was waiting for me there. The west corridor was longer than most hallways at Aldenwick, stretching between the main academic wing and the older administrative building, lined with tall windows that let in the pale afternoon light. It was usually busy at this hour, filled with students heading to clubs or waiting for transport home. Today it was almost empty. That emptiness told me more than any rumor could have. I passed a small group of younger students near the vending alcove, and they went silent the moment they saw me, watching with wide eyes before hurrying off in the opposite direction. A teacher, Mr. Bennett, stood near his classroom door with a stack of papers in his arms, and though he glanced at me, he did not call out a greeting the way he usually did. He simply watched me pass, his expression unreadable, before stepping back into his room and closing the door with a soft click. Word had clearly spread far beyond the students involved. I kept walking at my normal pace, refusing to let my steps quicken or slow. My mother used to say that fear has a scent, even if no instrument can measure it, and that predators of every kind, whether animal or otherwise, can sense when someone is trying too hard to appear calm. The only real defense against that was actual calm, earned through preparation rather than performance. As I walked, my mind drifted back to my early years on the Kestrel Range, the way it often did whenever I needed to steady myself. I thought about the training that every child there received, not in a formal classroom, but through the simple necessity of staying alive. I remembered being 7 years old, standing at the edge of our settlement with my father during a rare calm evening, watching storm clouds gather over the eastern peaks. He had knelt down beside me, pointing at the horizon. "You see how the clouds curl there, near the ridge," he had said. "That curl means the storm will hit within the hour, not within the day like the weather reports say. The instruments are useful, but they are slow. Your eyes and your instincts need to be faster." I had asked him then why we did not simply move somewhere safer, somewhere without storms that could kill a person in minutes. "Because this land makes us who we are," he had answered. "Somewhere easier would make us someone else." I had not fully understood what he meant back then. I understood it much better now, walking down a quiet corridor on a school built for gentler species, carrying inside me a kind of steadiness that no lecture or sensor system could measure. My thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice calling my name from behind. "Mira, wait." I turned to see Noah jogging to catch up, his uniform jacket slightly askew, his expression tight with worry. Noah was another human student, 2 years ahead of me, one of the few others from Earth currently enrolled at Aldenwick, though he came from a much gentler region than my own, a coastal city where the worst weather amounted to a strong rainstorm. "I heard what is happening," he said once he reached me. "You cannot seriously be walking toward the west corridor right now." "I am simply heading home," I said. "This is the way I normally go." "Not today, it is not," he said. "Mira, 4 of them are waiting for you. Sela, Vantik, Korath, and Threll himself. That is not a normal after-school disagreement. That is an ambush." I appreciated his concern, the same way I had appreciated Lily's earlier, but I could hear something else beneath his worry, something that made me pause. "You know what will happen if I stand my ground, don't you?" I said quietly. Noah's jaw tightened. "I know what could happen," he said. "That is exactly the problem. If you do anything to them, even in self-defense, the school will not see it that way. They will see a Deathworlder attacking gentle students. It will not matter who started it. It will only matter who ends up hurt worse." His words settled into my chest like a stone dropped into still water. He was right, and we both knew it. Aldenwick prided itself on being a place where every species could study together safely, where the strong were expected to restrain themselves for the sake of the fragile. That principle made sense in most situations. It became a very different kind of burden when the fragile ones decided to use their fragility as a weapon, knowing full well that any response, however measured, would be judged far more harshly than the aggression that caused it. "I know," I told him. "Then turn around," he said. "Take the east stairwell. Let campus security handle Threll and his friends if they cause trouble. You do not have to prove anything by walking straight into this." I considered his words carefully, turning them over the way I would examine an unfamiliar plant before deciding whether it was safe to touch. Part of me recognized the wisdom in what he was suggesting. Avoiding a confrontation was almost always the better choice, back home and here. My community had a saying about that too, one I had heard from elders my entire childhood. The strongest storm shelter is the one you never need to test. But something else held me in place, something that went beyond simple stubbornness. "If I turn around today," I said slowly, thinking through the words as I spoke them, "then tomorrow it will not be 4 of them. It will be 6, because they will have learned that fear works. And it will not stop at me. It will move on to Lily, or to you, or to anyone else who does not fit neatly into what this campus considers acceptable." Noah opened his mouth to argue, then closed it again, his expression shifting from frustration to something closer to reluctant understanding. "That does not mean you have to walk in there and let them hurt you," he finally said. "I have no intention of letting anyone get hurt," I told him, and I meant it in a way I do not think he fully understood yet. We continued walking together in silence for a few moments, the corridor stretching ahead of us, quieter with every step. The overhead lights remained dimmed in that same cool tone I had noticed earlier, and I found myself glancing up at the small sensor nodes spaced along the ceiling every few meters. Each one blinked steadily, monitoring the environment the way they always did, though something about their rhythm felt different today, slower, almost hesitant. Aldenwick's building systems had been designed by an engineering collective that specialized in creating environments for extremely delicate species, capable of detecting sudden temperature shifts, unusual sound frequencies, even slight changes in air pressure that might indicate danger to someone with fragile bones or sensitive respiratory systems. The system had never, to my knowledge, been tested against a student like me. We reached a junction where the corridor split, one path leading toward the west wing, where Threll and his friends were reportedly waiting, the other curving back toward the main courtyard and the safer route home. Noah stopped at the junction, clearly hoping I would take the safer path. "Last chance," he said. "Please." I looked down the west corridor, empty and quiet, lit by that same dim, cautious light. I thought about my mother's steady hands, my father's lessons about storms and instincts, and the years I had spent carefully making myself smaller so that no one here would ever have reason to fear what I actually was. I had spent 3 years hiding my strength so thoroughly that people had begun to mistake my restraint for weakness. Perhaps that mistake needed correcting, though not through violence, not through anything that could be called an attack, simply through the truth of what would happen if 4 frightened, angry students decided that a quiet girl who never fought back was an easy target. "I will be careful," I told Noah again, the same words I had given Lily earlier that day, though I suspected he understood them the same way she had, as an answer that was not quite a promise. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "If anything happens, I am calling security immediately," he said. "I mean it, Mira." "Thank you," I told him, "and I meant that too." He hesitated a moment longer before turning and heading toward the courtyard, glancing back over his shoulder twice before disappearing around the corner. I stood alone at the junction for a moment, feeling the quiet weight of the empty corridor ahead of me. Somewhere down that hallway, 4 students were waiting, fueled by embarrassment and anger, believing they were about to teach a lesson to someone who could not possibly fight back. I thought about the storms of my childhood, the ones that arrived without warning and tested every person in their path. I thought about how the mountain never apologized for being dangerous, and how, in the end, it was not cruelty that made it that way. It was simply what it was, shaped by forces far larger than any single choice. I was not planning to hurt anyone. I want to be clear about that, even now, looking back on what happened. But I was also done pretending to be something I was not, simply to make other people comfortable with a version of me that did not actually exist. I adjusted my bag one final time, took a slow, steady breath, and stepped into the west corridor. The lights above me flickered once, dimmed further, and the low ambient hum of the building's systems seemed to fall almost completely silent, as though even the walls themselves were holding their breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The west corridor narrowed slightly near its center, where a bank of tall windows overlooked the empty courtyard below. It was there, exactly where the rumors had said they would be, that I found Threll and his 3 companions waiting. Threll stood at the front, his posture perfectly composed, despite the tension I could see running through his shoulders. He was tall for a Kael'thi, with the pale, elegant features common to his family line, silver hair swept back neatly, his uniform pressed without a single wrinkle. Beside him stood Vantik, broader than most Kael'thi students, though still slight compared to me, his expression carrying none of Threll's practiced calm, only open hostility. Korath stood slightly behind them, arms crossed, watching me with narrowed eyes. And near the window, almost as if trying to remain separate from the group, stood Sella, smaller than the others, her fingers twisting nervously at the edge of her sleeve. 4 against 1, exactly as Lily had warned. I stopped a few paces away, keeping my posture relaxed, my hands loose at my sides. "I did not expect a welcoming committee," I said, keeping my voice even. Threll's lips curled into something that was not quite a smile. "We thought it only fair to give you the same audience you gave me this morning," he said. "A public lesson, since you seemed so eager to teach one." "I did not intend to embarrass you," I said. "I answered a question honestly. That is all." "Honesty," Vantik said, stepping forward slightly. "That is an interesting word for what you did. You made him look like a fool in front of the entire class." I looked at each of them in turn, searching their faces for any sign of hesitation, any indication that this could still be resolved with words instead of anything more serious. Sella would not meet my eyes at all, her fingers still twisting at her sleeve. Korath's expression remained unreadable, though his stance suggested someone following along rather than leading. Vantik's anger seemed genuine, if somewhat performative, the kind of anger young people often display when trying to prove loyalty to a friend. Threll was the only one who worried me, not because of any physical threat he posed, but because of how carefully controlled his expression remained, even now. "This does not need to go any further," I said. "If Threll felt embarrassed, I am willing to discuss that with him directly, privately, without an audience." That offer earned a short, sharp laugh from Vantik. "She thinks this is a negotiation," he said, glancing at Threll. "She thinks we are here to talk." Threll's pale eyes remained fixed on me, and for the first time I saw something flicker behind his composed expression, something that looked almost like uncertainty. "You should have simply lost the debate quietly," he said. "Humans are supposed to understand hierarchy. Your kind fought your way up from nothing, did you not? Surely you understand the importance of knowing your place." "I understand hierarchy well enough," I said. "I also understand that hierarchy built on fear rarely survives contact with anything that refuses to be afraid." The words came out calmer than I expected, though I felt the weight of them as I spoke. Vantik's jaw tightened, and Korath finally uncrossed his arms, stepping forward to stand beside his friend. "Enough talking," Vantik said. "Let us see how much of that calm confidence survives the next few minutes." He moved first, faster than I expected, closing the distance between us with a sudden lunge, his hand aimed at my shoulder in a shove meant to send me stumbling backward into the wall. I did not move. His hand connected with my shoulder, and I felt the impact, a solid push carrying real force behind it, the kind of force that would have sent most students at Aldenwick sprawling onto the floor. My feet remained planted. My body did not so much as sway. Vantik's eyes widened, his hand still resting against my shoulder as though he could not quite process what had just happened. I did not retaliate. I simply stood there, watching him, waiting to see what he would do next. He stepped back, staring at his own hand, as though it had betrayed him somehow. "That is not possible," he muttered. Korath moved next, more cautious than Vantik had been, circling slightly, before delivering a quick strike toward my side, testing rather than committing fully. I felt that impact as well, a sharp jolt of pressure against my ribs, the kind of hit that would have easily bruised, perhaps even cracked something, on a more fragile frame. I exhaled slowly through my nose, and remained standing exactly where I was. Korath's confidence, thin as it had been, evaporated entirely. He stepped back beside Vantik, both of them now watching me, with expressions that had shifted from aggression toward something closer to confusion, even a touch of fear. Threll had not moved yet, watching the exchange with narrowed eyes, his composed mask slipping further with each passing second. "This is a trick," he said, though his voice carried less certainty than his words suggested. "Some kind of protective equipment, hidden beneath her uniform." "I am not wearing any equipment," I said. "This is simply what my body is, shaped by a world that never allowed it to be anything less." "Prove it," he said. "Remove your jacket." I considered the request for a moment, before deciding it would settle the matter faster than continued argument. I removed my uniform jacket, folding it carefully and setting it on a nearby bench, standing before them in only my undershirt, my arms bare, showing nothing except ordinary skin, no hidden padding, no concealed technology. Threll stared at my arms as though searching for some seam or hidden device, some proof that what he had just witnessed could be explained away. There was nothing to find, because there was nothing hidden. Sella, who had remained silent and separate from the confrontation until this point, finally spoke, her voice trembling slightly. "Threll, perhaps we should stop," she said. "This does not feel right anymore." "Quiet," he snapped, not even looking at her. "This changes nothing. She is still outnumbered. Strength alone does not win every fight." He turned to Korath and Vantik, his expression hardening with renewed determination. "Together," he said. "All three of us at once. No single strike is going to accomplish anything if we continue testing her one at a time." I felt a small flicker of concern at that, not for myself, but for what might happen if their combined effort forced my body into a defensive response I could not fully control. I had trained for years to absorb impacts without reacting, to remain passive under pressure the way my mother had taught me, understanding that any counter-movement from someone with my physical capabilities could cause serious harm to someone with a far more fragile frame. "Please reconsider this," I said, my tone firm but calm. "I do not want anyone here to get hurt, including any of you." Vantik laughed again, though this time it sounded forced, an attempt to reclaim confidence that had already begun slipping away. "Concerned about our safety now," he said. How generous. The three of them moved together this time, coordinated in a way that suggested some shared training background, striking from 3 different angles simultaneously, aiming for my shoulders, my back, and my legs in an attempt to overwhelm whatever resistance my body offered. I felt each impact clearly, 3 distinct points of pressure arriving almost at the same instant, carrying genuine force that would have dropped most students at Aldenwick to the ground in serious pain. I remained standing, my breathing steady, my expression calm. The 3 of them stumbled back from the effort, breathing hard, staring at me with expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and genuine alarm. I did not smile, I did not gloat, I simply stood there, watching them process what their own senses were telling them, waiting to see whether this would finally be enough to end things peacefully. "Something is wrong with the sensors," Korath said suddenly, glancing up toward the small monitoring node embedded in the ceiling above us. "Look at the light. It is not responding the way it should." I followed his gaze and noticed what he meant. The sensor node, usually blinking steadily to indicate normal environmental monitoring, now flashed rapidly, an irregular pattern I had never seen before, as though the building systems were struggling to process readings that did not match any expected pattern in their database. Aldenwick's environmental network had been built to protect fragile students from environmental hazards and to detect early signs of physical distress during any conflict, automatically alerting faculty and security if injury levels crossed certain thresholds. It had clearly never been designed to interpret a situation where the expected victim remained entirely unaffected by repeated forceful contact. Threll stared at the flickering light for a long moment before turning back to me, something dark and desperate creeping into his expression, a look I recognized immediately, the look of someone who has run out of options they consider acceptable and is beginning to consider ones they do not. "This is not over," he said quietly, more to himself than to me. "Threll," Sella said again, her voice sharper this time, stepping forward slightly. "Look at what is happening. We should stop now, before this goes any further." He ignored her completely, his attention fixed entirely on me, his hand slowly moving toward the inside pocket of his uniform jacket. I felt something shift in the air around us, a subtle change in tension that had nothing to do with physical force and everything to do with intention. Vantik and Korath, still catching their breath from the earlier exchange, both noticed the movement as well, their expressions shifting from confusion to something closer to alarm. "Threll," Vantik said carefully, "what are you doing?" Threll did not answer. His hand withdrew from his jacket pocket, and in it I saw the unmistakable shape of a small energy device, compact enough to conceal easily, designed for use in supervised training exercises under strict faculty control, never intended for use outside those controlled environments. The corridor around us seemed to grow impossibly quiet, the ambient hum of the building systems fading almost entirely, the flickering sensor light above us pulsing faster and faster as though the walls themselves understood, more clearly than any of us standing there, exactly how serious this had suddenly become. Everything in me went very still. I had spent years learning to hold back, to absorb, to remain calm under pressure that would have broken most people, and every part of that training had been built around one simple principle. Restraint was only possible when the danger involved was survivable. The moment that stopped being true, a different kind of training took over, one my mother had drilled into me during the hardest winters of my childhood, when survival meant reacting instantly and without hesitation, not out of anger, but out of necessity. An energy device like the one Threll held was not part of any approved sparring exercise. It was training equipment meant for supervised practice under the direct guidance of an instructor, calibrated carefully to deliver controlled, limited discharges. Used properly, under supervision, it was harmless. Used carelessly, by someone untrained and driven by panic and wounded pride, it could cause serious injury, even to someone with my physical resilience, and it could certainly cause lasting harm to anyone standing nearby if the discharge missed its intended target. "Threll," Sella said again, her voice rising with real fear now, "put that away. This has already gone too far." He did not listen. His hand tightened around the device, and I watched his thumb shift toward the small activation switch along its side. I moved. I want to be clear about what happened next, because in the days that followed, several different versions of this moment circulated through the school, each one exaggerated in its own way. What actually happened took less than 2 seconds, and it was neither dramatic nor violent in the way people later described it. I crossed the distance between us in a single smooth step, faster than Threll could react, faster than his hand could complete the motion needed to activate the device. My fingers closed around his wrist, firm but controlled, applying just enough pressure to stop the motion of his hand without causing any lasting injury to the delicate bones beneath his skin. At the same time, my other hand caught the device itself, easing it from his grip, with the same careful control, the way someone might gently take a sharp object away from a child who did not fully understand the danger they were holding. Threll gasped, more from shock than pain, his eyes wide as he stared at his own captured wrist, at the device now resting harmlessly in my open palm. The entire corridor fell into absolute silence. I released his wrist immediately, stepping back to give him space, holding the small device loosely in my hand, deactivated, harmless now that it was no longer in the grip of someone driven by panic and anger. Vantik and Korath stood frozen in place, staring first at Threll, then at me, then at the device in my hand, their expressions caught somewhere between disbelief and dawning realization of exactly how close things had come to a very different outcome. Above us, the sensor node embedded in the ceiling had stopped its rapid flickering entirely. Instead, it now glowed a steady, unbroken red, a color I had never seen it display before, one that I would later learn indicated a full system alert, the highest level of concern the building's monitoring network was capable of registering. The ambient hum of the corridor's environmental systems, which had faded almost to nothing throughout the entire confrontation, remained silent, as though even the machinery built into these walls needed a moment to process what it had just witnessed. Threll pulled his hand back against his chest, cradling his wrist, though I knew, with certainty, that I had not caused any injury. His face had gone pale in a way I had not seen before, not the pale of embarrassment from that morning's class, but something closer to genuine fear. I did not raise my voice. I did not lecture him. I simply held the device out toward him, resting it gently on the nearby bench beside my folded jacket, well out of anyone's immediate reach. That was never meant to leave a supervised training room, I said quietly. You know that as well as I do. Sela had moved closer during the confrontation, standing now near Threll's side, her earlier nervousness replaced by something firmer, a kind of quiet resolve that had clearly been building throughout the entire encounter. We need to stop, she said, looking directly at Threll, all of this, right now, before someone reports what almost happened here. Before anyone could respond, the sound of quick footsteps echoed from the far end of the corridor, growing louder as they approached. I recognized the voice that called out a moment later, sharp and authoritative, cutting through the tension that still hung heavy in the air. What is happening here? Professor Adrian rounded the corner first, her expression already tight with concern, before she had even fully taken in the scene before her. Behind her came two members of the campus security staff, along with Mr. Bennett, who must have contacted them after seeing me pass his classroom earlier. Noah followed closely behind the group, having clearly made good on his promise to alert someone the moment he sensed real trouble unfolding. Professor Adrian's eyes moved quickly across the scene, taking in Threll's pale face and cradled wrist, Vantik and Korath standing frozen near the window, Sela positioned protectively beside Threll, and finally settling on me, standing calmly near my folded jacket, with a small deactivated training device resting on the bench beside it. Someone needs to explain exactly what occurred here, and I expect complete honesty, she said, her tone leaving no room for evasion. For a long moment, no one spoke. Vantik and Korath exchanged uncertain glances, clearly unwilling to be the first to explain a situation that reflected poorly on all of them. Threll remained silent, staring down at the floor, his earlier bravado completely gone. It was Sela who finally spoke, her voice steady despite everything that had just happened. We ambushed her, she said simply. All four of us. Threll was upset about being embarrassed during this morning's class, and he convinced the rest of us to confront her after school. She tried to talk her way out of it. She never once tried to hurt any of us, even when we struck her directly, more than once. Then Threll brought a training device from the supervised practice room and activated it, and she stopped him before anyone could get hurt. Professor Adrian's expression darkened considerably as she turned to look at the device resting on the bench, then back at Threll. Is this true? She asked him directly. Threll did not answer immediately. When he finally did speak, his voice carried none of the arrogance he had shown earlier that day. Yes, he said quietly. It is true. The security officers moved forward at that point, one of them carefully collecting the deactivated device from the bench, while the other began speaking quietly with Vantik and Korath, separating the group to gather individual accounts, a standard procedure I had read about in the student handbook but never expected to witness firsthand. Professor Adrian turned to me, her expression softening slightly, though concern still lingered in her eyes. "Are you injured in any way?" she asked. "I am fine," I said honestly. No lasting harm was done, on any side. She studied me for a long moment, glancing briefly at the spots where Vantik and Korath's strikes had landed, spots that showed no visible mark of any kind, despite the force I knew had been behind them. "We will need a full statement from you as well," she said, "and I suspect the administration will want to discuss what happened here in considerable detail, given the seriousness of what was involved." "I understand," I said. As the security officers began escorting Threll, Vantik, and Korath toward the administrative offices for further questioning, Sella lingered behind for a moment, glancing at me with an expression I could not quite place, somewhere between apology and something closer to genuine curiosity. "I did not know humans could be like that," she said quietly. "I mean no offense by saying so. I simply never understood, until today, what a Deathworld actually means for the people who come from one. I do not think most people here have ever had reason to understand," I told her. "There was never any reason for you to know something that never affected your own life, until today." She nodded slowly, then turned and followed the others down the corridor, leaving me alone with Professor Adrian, Mr. Bennett, and Noah, who had remained quiet throughout the entire exchange, watching me with an expression that mixed relief with something I could not quite identify. Professor Adrian gestured for me to gather my things. "Come with me," she said. "We have a great deal to discuss, and I imagine you have a great deal you have never explained to anyone here." I picked up my jacket from the bench, slipping it back on, and glanced up one final time at the sensor node embedded in the ceiling above us. It had shifted color again, no longer the alarming red from moments before, though it had not yet returned to its usual calm blue either. Instead, it held steady at a soft amber, as though the building itself remained uncertain about what category to place what it had just witnessed. I followed Professor Adrian down the corridor, Noah falling into step quietly beside me, neither of us speaking as we walked past the tall windows overlooking the courtyard, the late afternoon light casting long shadows across the polished floor. Behind us, the corridor remained unusually quiet, the ambient hum of the environmental systems returning slowly, hesitantly, as though the walls themselves were still deciding whether it was safe to relax. The administrative office at Aldenwick was a quiet, formal room, its walls lined with portraits of past headmasters from a dozen different species, its tall windows overlooking the same courtyard I had crossed countless times without ever imagining I would be called here under these circumstances. Headmaster Yulin sat behind a wide desk made of pale polished wood, an elderly Kael'thi with silver hair and calm, measured eyes that had clearly seen a great many disputes over the course of a long career. Professor Adrian stood near the window, arms crossed, while Mr. Bennett occupied a chair near the door. Noah had been asked to wait outside, though I suspected he had not gone far. I sat across from the headmaster, my statement already given in careful detail, the same account Sella had provided moments earlier, now confirmed by both Vantik and Korath under separate questioning. "This is a serious matter," Headmaster Yulin said finally, folding his hands on the desk before him. 4 students conspiring to confront and intimidate a classmate is already grounds for significant disciplinary action. The introduction of a training device outside supervised conditions elevates this considerably further. "I understand," I said. He studied me for a long moment, his expression thoughtful rather than accusatory. "What I find myself considering," he continued, "is a different question entirely. Not what should happen to the 4 students involved, though that matter will certainly be addressed. What concerns me is how a situation this dangerous was allowed to develop without any member of our staff recognizing the risk in advance." Professor Adrian shifted near the window. "With respect, Headmaster," she said, "our monitoring systems are calibrated to detect physical distress in students based on typical thresholds for our enrolled species. Miss Voss's physical resilience appears to fall so far outside those thresholds that the system registered no cause for concern until the moment an actual weapon was introduced. Headmaster Yulin nodded slowly, turning his attention back to me. "Is this accurate?" he asked. "Did you sustain no injury at all during the physical confrontation, prior to the device being introduced?" "None," I said honestly. "The impacts were real, and I felt them. They simply did not cause harm." He was quiet for a long moment, considering this. "I have read your enrollment records, of course, when you first arrived at Aldenwick," he said. I understood, in an academic sense, what it meant that you came from an environment your species classifies as extremely hazardous. I do not think I ever fully appreciated what that meant in practical terms, until today. "Most people here have not had reason to," I said, echoing what I had told Sella earlier. "It was never something anyone needed to think about, until it suddenly became necessary." Headmaster Yulin leaned back slightly in his chair. "I want to ask you something directly, Miss Voss, and I would appreciate an honest answer. When you realized 4 students intended to confront you, why did you not simply avoid the situation entirely? You clearly possessed the physical capability to walk away without any risk to yourself." I considered the question carefully before answering. "I could have avoided it," I said. "Several people encouraged me to do exactly that. But I have spent 3 years here trying very hard to seem as unremarkable as possible, worried that anything else would frighten people who had every reason to feel vulnerable around someone like me. I worried that if I always simply disappeared whenever conflict arose, it would only teach the people causing that conflict that fear and intimidation worked. That lesson would not have stayed contained to me alone." The headmaster considered this for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "That is a heavier burden to carry than most students your age should have to consider," he said finally. "It is the world I come from," I said simply. Considering the safety of others before considering my own comfort was never optional there. I did not expect it to become optional simply because I left. Professor Adrian spoke again, her tone gentler than before. "For what it is worth," she said, "your restraint throughout this entire situation reflects considerable credit on you. Many students, human or otherwise, faced with a coordinated assault, would not have shown the same discipline you demonstrated." I appreciated her words, though I did not entirely feel deserving of praise for simply refusing to cause harm to people who had chosen to cause harm to me first. It felt less like an achievement and more like the only acceptable outcome available to someone raised the way I had been. The meeting concluded shortly after, with Headmaster Yulin assuring me that Threll, Vantik, and Koreth would face serious disciplinary consequences, and that Sella's honesty and eventual attempt to de-escalate the situation would be considered favorably in her own case. He also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that the school's engineering team would likely need to recalibrate certain monitoring systems given what they had learned about the range of physical resilience among their student population. I left the office as the late afternoon light began fading toward evening, the courtyard outside painted in soft orange tones as the sun dropped lower behind the campus buildings. Noah was waiting exactly where I expected him to be, leaning against a nearby pillar, his expression shifting to relief the moment he saw me. "Well," he said, "how did it go?" "About as well as it could," I said. "They will be disciplined. Sella will likely face less severe consequences given how things ended." He nodded slowly, falling into step beside me as we made our way toward the main entrance. "I have to admit," he said after a moment, "part of me expected something far worse when I called security. I did not think it would end with you simply taking the device away and standing there afterward, completely unharmed. I did not want it to end any other way," I told him. We walked the rest of the way toward the entrance in comfortable silence, and as we stepped outside into the cooling evening air, I found myself thinking about Sella and the quiet resolve she had shown once she finally decided enough was enough. I thought about Threll and the fear I had seen in his eyes once he realized how badly he had misjudged the situation. I thought about my mother's steady hands and my father's lessons about storms and instincts, lessons that had shaped every decision I made that day, from the moment I first heard the whispers in the hallway to the moment I finally set that small device down harmlessly on a bench. Lily found me the following morning, waiting near my locker with an expression that mixed relief and disbelief in equal measure. "I heard everything happened exactly the way people are saying," she said. "Is it true? Did you really just stand there and let them hit you, without a single mark to show for it?" "It is true," I said. "And the device. Threll actually brought a weapon." "He did," I said quietly. "It is being handled by the administration now." Lily shook her head slowly, leaning against the locker beside mine the same way she had the previous afternoon, though her expression now carried something different, less worry and more quiet respect. "I do not think anyone here fully understood what it means, coming from where you come from," she said. "I certainly did not really, not until yesterday. Most people never have reason to," I told her, the same words I had offered twice already, though I suspected I would find myself saying them many more times before my years at Aldenwick came to an end. Over the following weeks, something subtle shifted across the campus, difficult to describe precisely, but impossible to ignore entirely. Students who had once looked past me in hallways now offered small nods of acknowledgement. Teachers who had treated me with the same careful, slightly distant courtesy reserved for any exchange student now seemed to watch me with a quieter kind of attention, one that felt less like caution and more like genuine curiosity about a world most of them would never fully understand. Sella approached me once, several days later, apologizing quietly for her role in what had happened, though I told her, honestly, that her choice to speak the truth once things had gone too far mattered more to me than her earlier hesitation. Threll, I did not see again in any of my classes, having been transferred to a different academic track following the disciplinary proceedings, though I heard, secondhand, that he had requested additional coursework focused on the histories and biology of harsher worlds, a small gesture I chose to interpret as genuine, if belated, curiosity rather than simple obligation. I never wanted to be feared at Aldenwick. I want that understood clearly. Even now, looking back on everything that happened, I only ever wanted to be understood, to be seen as someone shaped by circumstances rather than defined by them, someone who carried strength not as a weapon to be used, but as a responsibility to be carried carefully, the same way my parents had carried it before me, and their parents before them, across generations spent surviving a world that never once made survival easy. Even now, walking those same corridors on quiet afternoons, I sometimes notice the sensor nodes embedded in the ceiling pause for the briefest moment as I pass beneath them, their steady blue light flickering just slightly before returning to its normal rhythm, as though some small part of the building's memory had recorded what happened that day and chosen, quietly, to remember it. I never asked to be the storm that day. I only ever asked to be left in peace. But some things, once witnessed, cannot simply be forgotten, and even now, when I walk those halls, I swear the walls themselves still remember to hold their breath.